troops laid waste to the region, claimed the territory as Ottoman lands, and gained a valuable foothold in Europe. This marked the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's westward expansion into the Balkans and beyond. Over the next 16 years, Orhan continued to expand his territory and consolidate his power. In just 60 years, the Ottomans had risen from a tribe of nomads to become rulers of more than 500,000 people. In 1362, after a 38-year reign, Orhan, the first sultan of the Ottoman people, died. His son, Murad I, continued the aggressive expansion of the empire, following the same policy of tolerance as his predecessors: conquer and tax, rather than conquer and convert.
The Ottomans acted in a tolerant way, but not out of any philosophical commitment to something that we would call tolerance today, but for reasons of state. It was easier to subdue territories rather than to try and convert everybody.
The Ottomans' policy of religious tolerance made administering conquered territories much easier. It reduced resistance and diminished the chance of revolts. In many areas, Christian subjects welcomed the Ottomans more as liberators than as oppressors, paying less tax to the Ottomans than they had to previous rulers.
This had a kind of steamroller effect, which helps account for the speed with which the Ottoman conquests occurred, particularly in the Balkans. They simply rolled through whole areas because, yes, they fought. Whenever somebody stood out against them, they fought, and they won. But I think for every place they conquered by force of arms, they probably conquered 2 places by just a very effective PR system.
But for Murad, new Christian subjects offered a greater opportunity. He devised a plan to create a fierce and loyal cadre of troops. Ottoman officials descended on towns and Christian territories, ordering young boys of the village to come forth for inspection.
The villagers would display their youth, and the Janissary officer would go from one to the other. Height, weight, proportions. The officer would select the ones he thought would be best and took them with him.
Those selected became conscripts in Europe's first standing army, an army that would transform the continent's military landscape. They were known as new troops, or Janissaries. At first, panic spread throughout Balkan Christian communities when the Janissary recruiting officers arrived.
It was a process which entailed these children being dragged, literally dragged and forced out of their families.
Families begged local priests to delete their sons' names from parish registers. Some parents arranged marriages for sons as young as 12 to take advantage of the marriage exemption. But over time, attitudes changed.
Families realized how prestigious the path was. They knew what a promising career this could entail, and indeed not few of the more successful recruitees into this system later became very important high-ranking officials in the Ottoman state who did not forget where they came from.
New recruits were brought to the Ottoman capital and converted to Islam.
Allah, Allah, Eyvallah.
Allah, Allah, Eyvallah.
They underwent intense physical training and were drilled in the arts of war.
The training of the Janissaries was very thorough and, to a certain extent, ruthless. There was a physical training, weightlifting and wrestling. They practiced the various formations. There was archery practice regularly twice a week.
When their military training was complete, they were tattooed with a number and a symbol and sent out to work.
First, they were sent to Turkish families. It was a very heavy physical work, farming the land. When they returned, their physical shape was much better, they were much stronger, and they knew the language.
The strongest and brightest were sent to special schools to finish their education.
Janissaries who entered what are called the palace schools got a very broad education. They were trained in Arabic, Persian, Turkish. They were certainly trained in the Islamic sciences. Everyone was taught a skill.
Some were trained to play in Mater bands that led Janissary troops into battle. The sound of their drums and pipes struck terror in the hearts of their enemies.
The Janissary band was important to provide psychological support for the Janissaries, and it was especially important before and during battles and major sieges.
Janissaries who demonstrated extraordinary bravery were rewarded in later life with transfers from military service to civil service. A select few became part of the Sultan's inner palace circle, the counselors and viziers who quietly ran the government. Others were returned to their homelands as administrators. In effect, they became deputies of the Sultan's royal family.
So if you had been taken, let's say, at the age of 12, had been considered one of the top-notch kids, had been sent to the palace school, by the time you're 20, 21, and you pass out of that, you become an officer in the corps, you can become an officer in the provincial cavalry or an officer in some of the regiments of the palace. And eventually you rise up and you could even become the Grand Vizier. The only thing you couldn't become is the Sultan, because you're not a member of the dynasty.
Whether as soldiers, advisors, or administrators of far-off lands, the Janissaries' sole loyalty was to the Sultan. Murad's revolutionary concept gave him firm control over all his inherited and conquered lands, and turned the Ottoman state into a true empire, reaching deep into Europe. In 1389, Murad was 70 years old and still leading his troops into battle when he was mortally wounded in Kosovo. According to legend, as Murad lay dying, he named Bayezid, his younger rather than older son, to succeed him. Brooking no rival, Bayezid immediately ordered the murder of his older brother Yaqub. Murad's radical departure from eldest succession would set a deadly tradition and define the Ottoman dynasty for centuries.
This whole question of being an Ottoman prince, you were going to have to kill all of your brothers, or they were going to have to kill you. It's hard to imagine. As you grow up, living what for us is the unthinkable.
Over the next decade, the Ottoman Empire descended into chaos and civil war until a new sultan emerged as one of history's great conquerors. Through the early years of the 15th century, the fortunes of the Ottoman Empire rose and fell dramatically. Bayezid's overreaching expansion in Europe and Asia ended in defeat. But the next sultan, Mehmed I, rescued the empire from chaos and civil war, and his son, Sultan Murad II, led the Janissary Corps on a successful 20-year military campaign in Europe. By the year 1444, after 23 years in power, Sultan Murad II was exhausted.
Murad II was tired of the burdens of ruling and warring and negotiating, and really wanted to retire and become a solitary scholar.
Murad II then took an extraordinary and unprecedented step. He abdicated and handed over the monarchy to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II. But the son's reign was brief, and Murad II's retirement was short, just 2 years. The rise of a coalition of his old enemies, including Hungary and Venice, sent Murad II back into battle. This time, he remained Sultan until his death in 1451. When his son Mehmet II assumed the throne for the second time at the age of 19, he felt he was ready. But the Janissaries, still loyal to his father, were skeptical and rebellious.
The troops, the Janissaries and others, are used to looking to the father for leadership and guidance. And this young kid comes on the scene and people say, well, why should we take him very seriously?
As the empire again edged close to chaos, young Mehmet's enemies circled, watching and waiting. He needed a bold stroke, a conquest that would win over the skeptics. He turned his eyes to Constantinople.
Constantinople was a mythic place for the Ottomans. Constantinople represented imperial power, global success.
Sultan Mehmet, gerekse onun hocası Akşemseddin, Molla Gürani ve onunla
A primary motivation to capture Constantinople for Mehmet II were the words of the Prophet Muhammad himself, who said, conquering Constantinople would take a glorious army led by a superb commander.
Müjdesini verdiği güzel asker, güzel komutan olmak hedefi idi.
Mehmet had the confidence of a brash 19-year-old. He banished the Janissaries who challenged his rule and demanded a pledge of loyalty from those who remained.
The conquest of Constantinople was actually a message to rivals in the Ottoman power structure that he was challenging their authority.
Mehmet immersed himself in military manuals, studying the tactics and weapons of the world's most successful armies.
Mehmet 19 yaşında ikinci defa tahta geçtiğinde
Mehmet was willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goal. He was studying day and night, and he was even dreaming about it. Once he ordered his vizier to the palace in the middle of the night, and he told him, Pasha, Pasha, I can't sleep because my mind is filled with thoughts about conquering Constantinople. How are we going to do this?
alaraktan Paşa Paşa İstanbul'un fethini düşünmekten uyuyamıyorum.
In the spring of 1452, Mehmet ordered the construction of a new fortress just 6 miles from the outer walls of Constantinople. Wanting it completed quickly, the Sultan, with all the energy and impatience of youth, worked side by side with the stonemasons. Rumeli Fortress was completed in just 4.5 months.
He built, almost overnight, this enormous castle on the European side of the Bosphorus at one of the narrowest spots on the Bosphorus as a companion to a castle that already had been built by an earlier Ottoman sultan on the Asian side.
Together, these two fortresses would make it nearly impossible for supplies or reinforcements to reach Constantinople.
Any ships that came from the Black Sea that tried to break through to help Constantinople from that side, he would shell with artillery.
Simply being there cut off the ability to in any way provision the city. And that is reminiscent of what we'd seen even a century or so earlier when the Ottomans traditionally built fortresses outside of cities that they wanted to conquer and starve them into submission.
But Mehmet was not content to just wait. He marched 6,000 fresh troops into his new fortress. His intentions were clear. Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI was terrified. He immediately began to fortify the city.
Imperial Constantinople in 1453 was an enormous walled structure with a few villages inside, very scattered centers of population, that basically the city had become depopulated.
Yeah.
While still the crown jewel of the dwindling Byzantine Empire, Constantinople was no longer the majestic, thriving capital it had once been. The population had shrunk from almost 1 million at the end of the 10th century to just 40,000. But as a fortress, it was still almost impregnable, with 14 miles of reinforced stone walls. In some places, 2 lines of walls as high as 40 feet. It was one of the strongest fortifications of its time.
You can't imagine they're ever being conquered by anyone. Those great walls are what kept Constantinople from being overrun by its enemies for centuries.
Burası İstanbul'un kara tarafındaki kapılarından bir tanesi.